Question, Blaze, on this historical literature passion project. Okay. We're testing Thursday, so I'm not going to have you guys show me your book Thursday or tell me what your book is so I can look it up and prove it. But we will actually do that on Monday. Okay. Yeah, okay, now you have a question.
Audiobooks count, or do you want to?
I want you to read it.
Okay.
Can I like follow you and track you and what you're doing? No. You know what I mean? So I would rather you read it. I'm not opposed to audiobooks. To be honest, I've only listened to one audiobook in my life. Probably that's because I can't figure out the app very well. But I listened to 1984 this summer while I was walking. Because I remember reading in high school, but I didn't really read it in high school, you know what I mean? I mean, I kind of did, and, you know, but yeah, I was kind of on this dystopian kick. I don't know why. I'm kidding, right? Yeah, with the pandemic and everything, right? Yeah, so whatever, I mean, you know, I'd prefer you read it, okay? Because reading is good for you. It really is. I mean, you guys, you've taken biology, right? Yep. So you know what neurons are in the brain? And when you exercise those neurons, they tend to make more connections, and your brain works better. It's like a weird thing. It's kind of like a muscle, right? If you use the muscle, it gets stronger. If you don't use the muscle, it gets dumber. Okay. Yeah, so by Monday, try and have a book picked out, okay? I've approved a couple in here yesterday. Like I said, guys, I'm pretty flexible with that as long as it's, you know, it's got some, you know, academic value, something you're interested in and so forth. I do want you to read something you're interested in. I don't want you to read something you're not interested in because I want you to enjoy it and learn something that maybe you're more passionate about, okay? So as long as it's got some historical value to it, you're probably going to get a thumbs up, okay? And it's not a middle school book. You know what I mean by that, right?
Yes.
Okay. What's next? Last thing we did yesterday was watch a video of a haboob. Yes? Okay. So I didn't talk about this. We're going to finish today. And tomorrow will be a review day. I've turned in the review sheets to be printed off. I mean, some of you may have already printed one off. That's okay. I'll save it for later. And then I'll talk a little bit about the test on Wednesday as well. Thursday we'll test. Friday I will be gone. I'm getting a college credit Friday and Saturday, so I'm headed up to Downs, Kansas for the Kansas Storytelling Festival. Okay, so I'll be gone. You'll watch the video, and then Monday we'll look at your books and start module 19 and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Cool. Any more questions? Okay, I think we're where we need to be. Okay, so probably the worst year of the drought and the Dust Bowl was 1935. Okay, so like if you were looking for somebody to interview, man, I'd like to interview somebody that remembers the Dust Bowl and what that was like. Well, I know you guys are only 17, 18, but I'm old, and when I think back, okay, what do I remember from when I was little? You know what I mean? Not much. But I imagine if there was a Dust Bowl when I was 10, I'd probably remember that. So if 1935 was the worst year, you were born in 1925, which would make you like 96 now. Okay, so how many 96-year-olds are still around? Not very many, right? There's some. So, you know what I mean? So these stories of people that lived through some of the things we're talking about are starting to fade away. So hence one of the reasons we do the interview project. Yes? So we can remember those stories. All right? So 1930, worst drought in recent history. Congress votes $45 million to help farmers feed their livestock. But when somebody proposed a bill to give farmers $25 million to feed themselves, that did not pass. Is there logic behind this, or is it just cold-hearted?
They don't want to feed their livestock, they can use the livestock maybe.
Oh, there you go, right? So if you can keep the livestock alive, then the people can eat the livestock. Right? Okay. All right. Finally, allow 20, and again, this is key for Hoover. Yeah. Yes? Loans. Okay. All right. So we're not done with Hoover, but we're pretty much done with domestic policy for now. So what we'll be talking about the remainder of the today will be foreign policy. Okay. We've done a little bit of that to this point, but we're going to go take a step back to 1928 and Calvin Coolidge. Okay. I know I didn't do a lot on Calvin Coolidge because Calvin Coolidge didn't do a lot. He only served, he served the remainder of Harding's term, and then his, and that was it. I mean, he didn't run for re-election. So really, Coolidge's belief was for the government to get out of the way. We quote from Coolidge's, "The business of America is big business. Big business is doing well, then everybody else is probably doing well too." Okay, so that was kind of the way he governed. Now, when it comes to foreign policy, introduce you to this guy named Aristide Briand. Okay, French foreign minister. You guys remember the Five-Power Treaty? That limited the size of navies so that we would be less likely to go to war if we had fewer weapons. Disarmament. Okay. And I mentioned at the time that there are other treaties and pacts that were signed to try and prevent war. And this is a big one. This was Aristide Briand's idea. And some members of Congress invited him to share his idea with our Congress. So Briand gives an address to both houses of the U.S. Congress, and the American people hear this, and they're like, yeah, we like this. Now, Coolidge and his Secretary of State, Frank Kellogg, were not really big on this idea. They didn't really want to do it. But the American people wanted them to do it. So we would sign the Kellogg-Briand Pact, right? There's the signing ceremony. You got President Coolidge here, and this is Frank Kellogg here, and Aristide Briand next to him. Okay, some members of Congress. Okay, so it's a promise of 60 nations to renounce war as an instrument of their public policy or their national policy in relations with one another, except in matters of defense. So, guys, we did it. The human race figured out that we could sit down at a table, write this up, and everybody sign it, and we'll never have war again. It's a beautiful thing. It's surprising you guys probably hadn't heard of this before, because it's amazing that we had come this far as the human race. Okay, now, like I talked about with Five-Power Treaty, the only thing that is binding this together is a piece of paper, right? And you know what I did to the piece of paper last time, right? I'm not going to waste that one. Okay, now, which is what it is. It's a waste. I mean, historians look back at this, especially foreign policy experts, and snicker at the naivete of people actually thinking this was going to work. Okay, I've heard historians call it childish, naive. Okay. For the United States, it's going to give us a false sense of security. Okay. And really lead down a path of deep-seated isolationism for the United States. Okay. as I told you before, coming out of World War I, the American people were really against ever doing something like that again. Another major war like this. And the best way to stay out of a war is to stay out of people's business. So that's what we're going to attempt to do. Okay? But while we have this false sense of security, other nations may be building up armies, making plans about building empires, and so forth. So in the 1920s, this really wasn't that big of a deal. Now, this is signed in 28. But this will not last, okay? So this leads to an isolationist policy. In the 20s, which were relatively peaceful. The 30s, some things are going to start happening, especially with the Depression, that are going to lead to the rise of dictators. And dictators that seek to expand their empires. One of which we will talk about today. So the United States is not leading economically. No. We're using protectionism, tariffs, to cut off trade with the rest of the world. Yes? And then politically, we sign this document and then just go ahead and pull the covers over our head and not worry about it. Okay? So in reality, this pact may have more harm than good in the end. It will have little or no positive effect, as I would say. Now, if one of these countries were to violate this, one of these 60 nations, or the other 59, is there an agreement that says, well, the other 59 countries are going to go to war to stop you? Now that would have some teeth in it, right? 59 against 1. Okay, but that's not in the document. I mentioned this earlier when I talked about the 5-power treaty that France would be the first to violate it because of Italy and Mussolini, okay? So Mussolini calls himself a fascist. And his group that, followed him, that helped him, seize power in Rome, called the Black Shirts, okay? And so France will obviously pull out of the 5-power treaty. Now, before we go any further, I know it's probably been bugging you guys a little bit. You're thinking to yourself, Mr. Ebright, what's going on in Latin America during this time period? That kind of, that's kind of been on your mind, hasn't it? Been bugging you a little bit? Yeah, let's talk about that. We're good on this slide? Just about? Got it?
Yep.
Okay. It used to be a video I showed, but I don't show it anymore. Oh, what's going on here? Okay. Let me just fast forward here real quick and show you this. And I'll come back to the notes. Okay. This is American involvement in Latin America leading up to World War II and even during, up to 1917 generally. And then we start to kind of see more isolationism. So wherever a problem occurred south of us, generally our answer was to send in the Marines. Okay, that's going to change. And that's kind of what I'm pointing out here. This isolationism is real. Okay, so let's just, during the 19th century, in the early 20th century, American businesses had gone south, bought property, set up businesses in these other countries in Latin America. And whenever those business interests like fruit plantations or sugar plantations in the Dominican Republic, whenever the locals disrupted that, the answer was send in the Marines. Another thing that we've been pretty good at in this country is promoting governments that are favorable to the United States. Okay? I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember the 2016 election. Everything was about Russian collusion in our election, right? You think the Russians have been trying to affect our elections since the 1920s? That they would like to see a certain person over a different person elected? Think that's been going on? You don't think the Chinese think about who they'd rather have as president? And if they can find a way to influence that? The United States does this all the time. We try and influence elections overseas as well. Okay? Or coup attempts overseas and so forth. You know, the CIA. So that's something that we had traditionally done. Now, when it comes to Mexico, we've been involved down there a few times, you know. Mexican War of 1846, yeah. I think we had troops there in 1914 to 1917 in Mexico. But America, you know, remember I talked about Saudi Arabia and how Saudi Arabia asked us to come develop their oil fields. Well, Mexico did the same thing. They said, hey, can you guys come down here and find oil and, you know, get it out of the ground for us? So forth. And so, yeah, U.S. private companies had invested millions, went in, bought land, you know, did oil exploration, drilled, got it out of the ground, showed the Mexicans how to refine the oil into different fuels and so forth. Okay. And then in 1917, the Mexican government comes along and says, oh, thank you for doing all this. We'll take over now. And they nationalized the oil fields, basically confiscating American property. Now, they didn't enforce this till 1925. Okay. So a lot of American companies protested this. But when they did carry out expropriation, which is government, you know, seizure of private lands, that's expropriation. Okay. Now, the response from the United States normally would have been what? Send in the Marines. But we're not going to do that. Because the American people don't want another war. Okay, so we will boycott. The British will boycott. The Netherlands will boycott British goods for a couple of years. Okay, so if you speak Spanish or read Spanish, this is expropiación petrolera, one of the fiestas patrias of Mexico. Mexicans celebrate the date when President of Mexico, General Lázaro Cárdenas, declared oil reserve in Mexico's soil belonged to the nation. Okay, that's through their constitution. And there was an international boycott of Mexican products. By 1927, we passed a peaceful settlement with the government of Mexico. So no Marines, no war. Okay. So you start to see a kinder, gentler United States here dealing with Latin America. And that will expand under Hoover as well. So the Secretary of State under Coolidge was Kellogg. Secretary of State under Hoover is Stimson, Henry Stimson. And his goal is to improve our relations with Latin America. So what we refer to as the Stimson Doctrine mirrors the Monroe Doctrine. Since you guys are all honor students, you would all remember what the Monroe Doctrine, right? Okay, anybody want to take a crack at it? Daryl? Okay, so basically asking Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Yep, and we promised that we would stay out of theirs. Yes? Okay, so in this sense, what Henry Stimson is saying to Latin America is, no longer are we gonna be the bully in the neighborhood. Okay? We're not gonna send in the Marines, we're gonna accept South American political culture, even if we don't like it. And the only time we'll get involved when American lives are at stake. Okay? And this is going to go on to improve our relations with Latin America. Okay? The next president, Roosevelt, he's going to double down on this. And what becomes known as the good neighbor policy. Now, this is going to pay dividends, guys. Especially when World War II starts. And think about it, geopolitical thought process here is important. Guys, we are a two-ocean nation. Okay? If everybody in our hemisphere is our friend, the only chances of us being invaded by an enemy is from across an ocean. And that's a pretty good gig right there. So by using the Stimson Doctrine and later the Good Neighbor Policy, guys, when World War II does break out and we get involved in it, every single nation in our hemisphere will declare war on the German, Italian, and Japanese Axis powers. Okay? Now, Argentina has some pro-fascist elements in it. And so they were the last. They waited to see who was going to win before they chose sides. But eventually, every country in the hemisphere declared war on the Axis power. Okay? So, I mean, that shows you some wisdom in our foreign policy. Okay? We see a lack of that in certain areas and an abundance of it in other areas. Yes? Now, can we claim today that everybody in our hemisphere is our ally? No. Most of them are. Who is? Canada's our ally. They're like our stepchild. Okay? Yeah. Venezuela and Cuba. Yeah, like in 1963, guys, the Cuban Missile Crisis. They were allied with the Soviets. Okay. Now, have we stayed true to this over the decades? Yeah. We have interjected ourselves in Latin America when we feel like it's necessary for the benefit of the United States. Okay? Whether that's, the drug wars, or communist movements in our hemisphere, which we tend to try and reject. Okay? All right. So this map here goes on. Cuba, this is the Spanish-American War, 1898, 99, but also involvement after that. Haiti a couple times here, 1950, Dominican, Puerto Rico, that's Spanish-American War, Nicaragua, Panama, and Veracruz, Mexico, 1914, and so forth, okay? So, U.S. on the left, Latin America on the right. We're going to try and even that out a little bit, okay? All right. Here we go. Last slide. I have a slide on the causes of the Depression on the next one, so we'll be on this for a good 20 minutes, okay? Now, I want to take you back to 1904. in what was called the Russo-Japanese War. Okay? And this war is fought between Japan, here's China, okay, French Indochina, today Vietnam here, okay, and then the Soviet Union, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, okay. So the wars between, at the time, Russia, Tsar, and Japan. Does anybody know who wins? Japanese win. And the Japanese are going to lay claim to this peninsula right here. Korean Peninsula. Okay. Now this is vital, not just for this story, but today. Okay. The Japanese are going to control this Korean Peninsula from 1904 until the end of World War II, 1945. With me? Now, the Japanese, well, let me just back up a second. Everybody knows about Hitler and the view of Hitler and racial superiority of the Aryan people, yes? Everybody knows about that. But what you may not know about, the Japanese feel the same way about themselves. Not just when it comes to Asian people, all other Asian countries, they feel they're superior, but to all races. Most people don't talk about that yet. The Japanese believed in the racial superiority of the Japanese people. Okay? So, how did they treat the Koreans while they controlled the Koreans? They treated them as second-class citizens. You understand? Okay? Now, as Japan industrialized, they wanted more and more resources. And the best way for them to get more resources was to expand. So they created an incident that's going to occur at the border between Korea and China here, near a railroad. And the Japanese will use this as an excuse to invade this region or province of China known as Manchuria. China uses provinces, right? Grace, I forget what province you're from. Jiangxi province.
Like they're both like, what is it, the province?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like Lily's from the Hunan province, which is in the middle of the country here. Okay. So Manchuria will become a puppet state. Now, what we mean by that is that you leave the Chinese in power, but you control them like a puppet. You feed them wine, women, song. Let them stay in power. Then they do what you tell them to do to control the people. Follow me? That's a puppet state. So Manchuria will become known as Manchukuo. So everybody say that. Manchuria, Manchukuo. Manchuria, Manchukuo. Okay? So, I mean, we were pretty surprised that the Japanese did this. And what was more surprising is that the Kellogg-Briand Pact that had brought about world peace had failed. I mean, everybody thought it was going to work, right? Now, China signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact. You understand? Now, we have an international organization at this time that is supposed to promote peace between nations, yes? What's the name of that? The League of Nations. And China's a member of the League of Nations as well. And so they call an emergency meeting of the League of Nations with this invasion. Japan shows up. They're sitting at their desk with all the other people in the room, and the League agrees to invoke the Kellogg-Briand Pact and outlaw Japan. What does that mean? Outlaw Japan. I guess they're going to kick them out of the League of Nations. Japan, their delegation, picks up its papers, and walks out of the room. Dead silence. Okay? Now, who's going to step up and help China right here? U.S.? No. Do we want war? Nobody. China's on their own. The communist government in Russia is not seeking war at this point. They got enough of their own problems. Okay? What about the French? The French going to step up here? The British? Do they want war? No. What about the Australians, which is the British? No. Nobody's coming to the aid of China. You understand? Now, you can see from this graphic here, guys, the Japanese will continue to attack China throughout the decade of the 1930s and into the 1940s. Okay? Killing hundreds of thousands of civilians in the process. Let me get some more notes up before I go any further on that. So we had an American observer at the League of Nations because we're not a member. They invoked the Kellogg-Briand Pact to outlaw Japan. Kick them out of the league. Now, what can we do as people, as people around the world, the League of Nations or otherwise? What we could do is try and harm Japan economically. Make them pay for this, suffer, through what are called sanctions. You guys know what sanctions are? Some of you do. Okay. Where in the world do they make the best cigars? Anywhere in the world. In Cuba. It's 2021. Since 1959, it's been illegal to buy Cuban cigars in the United States. Now, you can buy them if you live in Canada or Mexico, but not in the United States, because we have sanctions against them. Now, many nations have sanctions against North Korea today. What you try and do is you isolate them economically. Don't allow trade with them, okay? And that weakens the leaders, weakens their grip on their people. Now, an unintended consequence of sanctions is it hurts the people as well. We have economic sanctions on Iran, on Russia today, and so forth. Okay? Because Russia, you know, they're doing some bad things, trying to meddle in our elections. And what about that? Do you guys remember that? The pipeline, the hacking thing? Okay, they think that originated in Russia. Now, do we have any evidence that it was Putin that ordered it? No, we don't. But we put sanctions on him so he would crack down on that kind of stuff that's originating from his country. You follow me? So Stimson, Henry Stimson, tells Hoover, let's put some sanctions on the Japanese. Let's punish them. And Hoover says no. So in reality, the Japanese are not going to suffer anything from this invasion. Which sends a really nice message to others that may want to do the same thing. Now, the former capital of China, today the capital is Beijing. The former capital of China is Nanking. Today the city is called Nanjing. Okay? In 1937, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I want to talk about it now. Japanese generals ordered the taking of the capital, Nanking. And Japanese forces went in. Now remember, Who's racially superior in the eyes of the Japanese? And what takes place in 1937 becomes known as the Rape of Nanking. This is one of the worst atrocities in human history that most Americans have no idea about. In fact, a lot of Japanese Americans don't know a lot about it either, because they don't teach it in their classes. Okay? Did you guys learn about slavery here, your junior year? Yeah. Okay, we teach it. I mean, we've got to cover our own sins. Okay, I think we do. We have to be open about it. Because if you ignore history, it's more likely to repeat itself. Yes? So, guys, the level of brutality here. So first of all, the first thing you're going to see, first time in modern warfare, or in any type of warfare, is the use of bombers. Remember World War I, we had fighter planes, little biplanes shooting at each other, right? Now the Japanese have built larger planes that carry bombs. So the first time in human history, we're going to see the bombing of another country from the air, and at the same time against civilian targets. Okay, so they're going to bomb the city of Nanking, and then they're going to invade it. As the Chinese army collapses, and Prince Yasuhiko Asaka's troops enter the city, they will begin killing. Estimates between 250,000 and 300,000 citizens of Nanking will be murdered by the Japanese. Now, for the women of Nanking, they estimate between 20,000 and 80,000 rapes before the women were murdered. Okay? This is an atrocity unlike seen rarely in human history. Okay? Now, there's a couple movies about this. One is called The Rape of Nanking, based on a book by Iris Chang. Iris Chang is a Chinese American that wrote about this, what happened in Nanking. Now, if you were to read something like that, you would have to obviously look for the bias because she's Chinese, she's writing about what the Japanese did. You know what I mean? So when you look at book reviews over what she wrote, there's some criticism of bias. But nonetheless, this took place. There's a movie called The Last Emperor, which talks about this puppet state here in Manchuria, which shows that. And then there's a movie that I really liked. Just one of those you click on Netflix and you watch it and you're like, wow, that was powerful. Okay. And it's a movie called The War of the Flowers. And you guys know who Christian Bale is? Batman, Christian Bale, right? He's a pretty good actor. So in this movie, which is loosely based on a true story, when I was in China in 2005, I was in the southern city of Guangzhou, and I saw a Catholic church. And I'm like, well, what's that? It was built before the communists came in, okay? It was built 100 years ago, all right? And it was still there, probably not used, but still there, okay? Guys, in the city of Nanking in 1937, there was a Catholic church. And with a priest. They also had an orphanage of young Chinese girls, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And in the bombing raid, the priest was killed. The church was hit, not destroyed, but the priest died in a bombing raid. So Christian Bale plays this character. He's an undertaker. He's being sent to the city of Nanking in the middle of a war to find the priest and give him the proper burial. Okay? So he's not, and he's portrayed in this movie as kind of a grifter. He's a drifter. He likes to drink, he likes to smoke, and he likes women. Okay? So That's how they portray him. He gets to this church to bury the priest, and he finds all these orphans, these young girls living there. And he knows what the Japanese are doing. You understand? Like, they are going through the city killing and raping and so forth. And guys, 10 years old doesn't matter for a Chinese soldier at this point. You understand what I'm saying? And he knows this, what's going to happen to these girls. Okay, so he decides to act like he's the priest and that this is a house of God and the Japanese need to stay out of this church. Okay, and that works for a little while. But I don't want to ruin the plot. But I'll just say this. Some geisha girls show up looking for refuge at the church. Geisha girls, I don't know if you know what they were. These are Chinese prostitutes. Okay? And let's just say, by the end of the movie, there is a major sacrifice, the part of some to save these young orphans. Okay? It's an amazing story and based on a true story. Okay? War of the Flowers. Okay? Christian Bale. All right? One more movie mentioned. Two movies. Well, one doesn't deal with this, but it's similar. How many of you guys have seen the movie Schindler's List? Okay, that makes me sad. No, just because historically it's such an important film. Oskar Schindler was a Nazi war profiteer. So when the Nazis were fighting in World War II, they needed labor. They needed people to build, artillery shells and pots and pans and all kinds of stuff. Well, Schindler used free labor, Jewish labor, to help build war materials for the German army, for the Nazis. So he had to join the Nazi party to do that and so forth. Well, at some point during the years that he was doing this, Oskar Schindler took a liking to the people that were working for him, respect for them, had an epiphany. And as the final solution to exterminate all European Jews started to be put in place, Oskar Schindler, all the millions that he had made, will use that millions to try and save these Jews that worked for him. Okay? And in the end, he will save more than 2,000 Jews from extermination. Now today, the offspring of those 2,000 Jews is like 10,000 people that are alive had it not been for Oskar Schindler. You understand? So, it's an amazing story. Okay? Well, there was a similar situation in Nanking in 1937. Guys, by 37, the Germans and the Japanese are allies. And so this guy named John Rube, R-U-B-E, this German Nazi, got these Chinese working for him in a factory in Nanking. Okay? So to protect them, he put a large Nazi flag over the top of his factory so that the Japanese wouldn't bomb it. Okay? Now, the other Germans that worked in that factory fled the city as the Japanese were coming in. John Rube stayed and protected those workers at his factory so the Japanese wouldn't kill him. And he convinced the Japanese not to because he was a Nazi. Okay, now, I know that's... he's a Nazi, okay? And so was Schindler, okay? But they both, risked their lives to save innocent people in the end. That makes sense, okay? So that's not as good as a movie as Schindler's List. And if I had to pick a movie to show you, like I said, all right, I got a week. We got a week. We can do this. I'm going to show a movie. There's a lot of great war movies I could show you, but I would probably show you Schindler's List just because it's such an important film. So put that on your list of things to do. I don't know if we'll have time or not. We'll see. Okay. So just something I wanted to address. And if you're really having trouble finding a book, it's not American history, but I've made an exception in the past, so why not now? If you want to read Iris Chang's The Rape of Nanking for this class, you may. I will tell you, It's not easy to read. It's in plain English, but it's painful to read. You understand? Okay. But I think that the more people that understood that's what happened back then, the better, from my opinion. Okay? All right. So we're more worried about what's happening here with our depression. We're not going to get involved. Okay? All right. This is the last slide. Talk about the test. There is a question over the causes of the Great Depression. It is a 6-point question. It is a question that says list and explain. So by deduction, can you figure out how many of these you're going to need to know? List and explain. Because you get a point for the explanation too, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's no mystery. Okay. We talked about all these. Okay. And that, I'll talk about more tomorrow with the test, review sheet, have those for you. And then you guys can take the rest of the hour tomorrow to study. Good?